1A. A. Full continuous script. Welcome to today's episode. Over the next hour, we're going to take a detailed, data-driven look at one of the most complex and often misunderstood areas of Canadian public policy: firearms, crime, and the legislative direction represented by Bill C-21. This episode is not legal advice, and it isn't a guide for how anyone should act. Instead, it's part of a broader effort to understand the available data, examine long-term trends, and place current policy choices into a clearer context. The goal is simple: to explore what the numbers actually show and how those numbers relate to the decisions being made at the federal level. Okay, I'm going to start this podcast differently. I'm going to use framing device or framed narrative, call it bookending if you wish, or an inverted introduction, as in thesis evidence restated thesis. In simple terms, I'm going to state the conclusions from data along with my own personal conclusions, right up front. I will reiterate these conclusions at the end, perhaps with some slight changes. Okay, let me start. I endorse and agree with all of the legal firearms owners who have spent time and money to acquire the necessary licenses to participate in this sport. I vehemently, strongly disagree with Bill C-21. I see this bill as being an affront, an indignity to licensed firearms owner. It's unnecessary. To a point, it reflects authoritarian legalism, along with economic authoritarianism. In other words, use laws to make people do as government wants, and if not by laws, then by economic and financial pressures. Bill C-21 is an attempt at both the issuance of laws with economic and financial consequences, which by stats appear to be unfounded and contrary to logic. The government's actions to inhibit and possibly destroy a major revenue-generating sector of the economy. What's really going on? Okay, well, in my humble opinion, Bill C-21 should disappear in a PCO2. It's just bad legislation. Kill it. Okay, now the data, facts, charts, which I will add at the end of the podcast. I work alone, so if I'm going to verbalize this text, then I can't bring up charts at the best time, so I'll bring up the charts at the end. Firearms policy in Canada sits at the intersection of public safety, criminal law, border enforcement, economics, and community well-being. It's a topic that generates strong opinions, but opinions alone don't tell the full story. What's often missing from the public conversation is a calm, structured examination of the evidence, the kind of analysis that helps us understand not just what is happening, but why. In this episode, we'll walk through the national landscape of firearm-related crime, including how it has changed over the past decade. We'll look at the differences between licensed and unlicensed individuals and what the data tells us about who is involved in violent incidents. We'll examine the types of firearms most commonly used in crime and how those patterns compare to the categories targeted by Bill C-21. We'll also explore the economic footprint of legal firearm ownership in Canada, a dimension that rarely enters the public debate, but one that plays a significant role in rural economies, tourism, retail, and conservation funding. And finally, we'll place all of this within the broader context of federal spending and fiscal pressures, not to critique policy choices, but to understand how different sectors of the economy interact with government priorities. Throughout this episode, the tone will remain neutral and documentary style. The focus is on data, context, and clarity. No advocacy, no emotional framing, just a careful walk through the facts as they are publicly reported. To understand the role of firearms in Canadian public safety, it helps to begin with the broadest possible view: the national landscape of violent crime, how often firearms are involved, and how these patterns have changed over time. In 2023, Canada recorded just over 14,000 firearm-related violent crime incidents. These incidents include homicides, attempted murders, robberies, assaults, and cases where a firearm was discharged with intent. While firearm-related incidents represent a small share of all violent crime, roughly 2.5%, they carry an outsized impact because of the severity and potential consequences associated with firearms. The national rate of firearm-related violent crime decreased slightly between 2022 and 2023, falling by just under 2%. But this short-term decline exists within a much longer upward trend. Compared to 2013, the rate of firearm-related violent crime in Canada is more than 50% higher. Even when year-to-year fluctuations occur, the long-term trajectory shows a steady increase over the past decade. Understanding where these incidents occur is just as important as understanding how many occur. Firearm-related violent crime is not evenly distributed across the country. The highest rates are found in the territories, where the combined rate is approximately 180 incidents per 100,000 people, several times higher than the national average. In the provincial north, particularly in rural areas, the rate is also significantly elevated, at around 165 incidents per 100,000. Urban areas in the northern provinces experience lower rates, but still higher than the national average. In the southern provinces, the pattern reverses. Rural communities in the south see around 40 incidents per 100,000, while urban areas in the south, home to the majority of Canada's population, experience the lowest rates, at roughly 32 incidents per 100,000. These regional differences reflect a combination of factors: population density, policing resources, socioeconomic conditions, community structures, and the presence of organized crime. They also highlight the importance of avoiding broad generalizations. Firearm-related crime in Canada is not a single phenomenon. It varies significantly depending on geography and local context. To understand the severity of violent crime more broadly, it's useful to look at the Violent Crime Severity Index, a measure that weights crimes according to their seriousness. In 2024, Canada recorded nearly 600,000 violent incidents. The overall severity of violent crime decreased slightly, about 1%, but the total number of incidents remained high. There were 788 homicides in 2024, a modest decline from the previous year, but still elevated compared to historical averages. Firearm-related homicides represent a small portion of total homicides, but they're among the most closely scrutinized because of their impact on public perception and policy. The presence of a firearm in a violent incident increases the likelihood of serious injury or death, which is why firearm-related crime receives significant attention even when it represents a small share of overall violence. It's also important to clarify what counts as a firearm-related violent crime. The definition includes any violent offense where a firearm is used, brandished, or even simply present. It also includes incidents involving imitation firearms, such as replicas or air-powered devices, when they are used in a threatening manner. This means that not every firearm-related incident involves a real, functioning firearm. In fact, a substantial portion of reported incidents involve unknown or imitation firearms, which complicates efforts to draw conclusions about the types of weapons used. Another key point is that firearm-related crime is not synonymous with firearm ownership. Canada has more than 2 million licensed firearm owners and millions of legally owned firearms. The presence of firearms in society does not automatically translate into firearm-related crime. Instead, the data shows that firearm-related violence is concentrated among specific groups, in specific regions, and often involves individuals who are already prohibited from possessing firearms. Understanding these distinctions is essential for evaluating the effectiveness of policy measures. When we look at the national landscape, the data tells us that firearm-related crime is relatively rare compared to other forms of violence, but it is serious, unevenly distributed, and increasing over the long term. It also tells us that the presence of a firearm in a violent incident is a strong indicator of severity, which is why policymakers continue to focus on this area. One of the most important questions in understanding firearm-related crime in Canada is also one of the simplest: who is actually involved in these incidents? The answer becomes clearer when we look at license status data, information that helps distinguish between individuals who are legally permitted to possess firearms and those who are not. Canada has one of the most comprehensive firearm licensing systems in the world. To legally own a firearm, an individual must complete certified safety training, pass written and practical examinations, undergo background checks, and meet ongoing eligibility requirements. Once licensed, individuals are subject to continuous screening, meaning that any new information that could affect their eligibility, such as criminal charges, court orders, or mental health-related concerns, is flagged automatically. Because of this system, licensed firearm owners form a well-defined group within national data. And when we compare license status information with violent crime statistics, a consistent pattern emerges. Across all categories of firearm-related violent crime, licensed firearm owners account for only a small fraction of incidents, typically between 2 and 3%. The remaining 97 to 98% involve individuals who do not hold a valid firearms license. This pattern holds across multiple years of data and across multiple types of violent offenses. The distinction becomes even clearer when we look specifically at homicides, where data collection is more detailed and consistent. In firearm-related homicides, only about 12 to 13% of accused individuals had a valid firearms license at the time of the incident. In other words, nearly 9 out of 10 individuals accused in firearm-related homicides were unlicensed. To understand why this distinction matters, it helps to clarify what homicide means in a legal context. Homicide refers broadly to one person causing the death of another. It includes criminal acts such as murder and manslaughter, but it also includes non-criminal cases such as self-defense or other legally justified actions. Because homicide is a broad category, license status data provides a more precise picture of who is involved in the most serious incidents. The data shows that licensed firearm owners, individuals who have undergone training, background checks, and continuous monitoring, are not the primary drivers of firearm-related violence in Canada. Instead, the vast majority of incidents involve individuals who are already outside the legal framework for firearm ownership. Criminology research supports this distinction. Studies consistently show that individuals involved in firearm-related crime often have prior criminal histories, are subject to court-ordered prohibitions, or are connected to organized crime networks. Many are legally barred from possessing firearms, yet obtain them through illegal channels such as smuggling, theft, or the underground market. This does not mean that licensed individuals never commit violent offenses. No group is entirely risk-free, but the data indicates that the licensing system, with its training requirements, background checks, and continuous screening, is effective at identifying and monitoring individuals who pose a higher risk. It also highlights a broader point. Firearm-related crime in Canada is not primarily a problem of legal ownership. It is a problem of illegal possession, illegal acquisition, and illegal use. Understanding this distinction is essential for evaluating the focus of current and proposed legislation. With this foundation in place, we can now turn to the next key question. What types of firearms are most commonly used in crime, and how does that compare to the firearms targeted by policy measures such as Bill C-21? National data provides a clear picture. Among all firearm-related violent crime in Canada, handguns are the most frequently involved type of firearm, accounting for approximately 49% of incidents. This includes cases where a handgun was discharged, brandished, or used to threaten. Handguns have consistently been the dominant category for more than a decade, particularly in urban centers where gang-related activity and organized crime networks are more prevalent. Rifles and shotguns, often referred to collectively as long guns, account for about 15% of firearm-related violent crime. This category includes a wide range of firearms, from traditional hunting rifles to semi-automatic sporting rifles. While long guns are more commonly owned legally in Canada than handguns, they appear far less frequently in violent crime. A smaller but notable category involves fully automatic firearms and sawed-off firearms, which together account for roughly 4.7% of incidents. Fully automatic firearms are tightly restricted in Canada and have been for decades. Their presence in crime is typically linked to smuggling or illegal modification, not lawful ownership. Sawed-off firearms, which are often created by illegally altering a shotgun or rifle, are also associated with criminal activity rather than legal possession. One of the largest categories in the data is unknown or imitation firearms, representing about 31% of incidents. This includes cases where the firearm could not be identified, as well as incidents involving replica guns, air-powered devices, or other imitation firearms. These items can still be used to threaten or intimidate, and they are included in the statistics because they contribute to the overall landscape of firearm-related violence. When we translate these percentages into estimated numbers, the pattern becomes even clearer. In a typical year, handguns are involved in roughly 7,000 incidents, rifles and shotguns in about 2,100 incidents, automatic or sawed-off firearms in around 600 incidents, unknown or imitation firearms in more than 4,000 incidents. These numbers highlight a consistent trend. Handguns, particularly illegal handguns, are the primary firearms used in violent crime in Canada. It's also important to consider the legal status of these firearms. Most handguns used in crime are illegal, meaning they are smuggled, unregistered, or possessed without a license. Handguns have been tightly regulated in Canada for decades, and legal acquisition requires a restricted class license, mandatory training, and membership in a shooting range. Despite these controls, illegal handguns continue to circulate through underground markets, often linked to cross-border trafficking. Semi-automatic rifles, which are a major focus of recent legislative proposals, appear far less frequently in crime. While semi-automatic designs exist in both handguns and long guns, the semi-automatic rifles targeted by policy measures, such as Bill C-21, represent a small portion of the firearms used in violent incidents. Fully automatic firearms, which are prohibited for civilian ownership except under rare grandfathered conditions, appear occasionally in crime, but their presence is almost always tied to smuggling or illegal modification. Their appearance in crime does not reflect legal civilian ownership. These distinctions matter because they help clarify the relationship between firearm types, legal frameworks, and criminal activity. The data shows that the firearms most commonly used in crime are not the same as the firearms most commonly owned legally. This gap between legal ownership and criminal use is a central theme in the broader discussion about firearm policy in Canada. To understand the direction of firearm policy in Canada, it's important to place Bill C-21 within its broader legislative and historical context. Firearm regulation in Canada has evolved over several decades, shaped by changes in technology, public expectations, and the national conversation around safety. Bill C-21 represents the latest step in that evolution, and its focus reflects a particular set of policy priorities. At its core, Bill C-21 aims to restrict or prohibit access to certain categories of firearms, with an emphasis on handguns and semi-automatic rifles. The legislation includes a national freeze on the sale, purchase, and transfer of handguns, effectively preventing new legal acquisitions. It also introduces new prohibitions on a wide range of semi-automatic center fire rifles with detachable magazines, as well as specific models such as the AR-15, the VZ-58, the Mini-14, the M14, and several others. These firearms are grouped together based on characteristics such as magazine capacity, action type, and potential for rapid fire. The bill also includes restrictions on high-energy rifles, such as those chambered in .50 BMG, and large-bore firearms with calibers of 20 millimeters or greater. These categories are relatively rare in civilian ownership, but they're included because of their power and potential to penetrate certain types of protective equipment. One of the most significant features of Bill C-21 is the introduction of an evergreen definition. This mechanism allows the legislation to automatically apply to future firearms that meet certain criteria, even if those firearms have not yet been designed or manufactured. The purpose of an evergreen definition is to prevent new models from falling outside the scope of the law simply because they were not explicitly named. It shifts the focus from specific makes and models to broader characteristics, such as action type or energy output. While Bill C-21 targets a wide range of firearms, it also leaves several categories untouched. Bolt-action rifles, lever-action rifles, Pump-action shotguns, rimfire rifles, air guns, and black powder firearms are not included in the prohibitions. These firearms are commonly used for hunting, sport shooting, and historical reenactment, and they represent a significant portion of legal firearm ownership in Canada. Understanding what the bill targets and what it does not helps clarify the policy rationale. The legislation is designed to limit access to firearms that are perceived as having a higher potential for misuse or rapid fire, even though these firearms appear relatively infrequently in crime statistics. The focus is on reducing the availability of certain types of firearms in civilian settings, rather than on addressing illegal possession directly. To place Bill C-21 in context, it's helpful to compare it to previous legislative efforts. Canada has a long history of firearm regulation, including the introduction of the Firearms Act in the 1990s, which established the licensing and registration framework still in use today. Over time, additional measures have been introduced to address specific concerns, such as safe storage requirements, background checks, and restrictions on magazine capacity. International comparisons also provide useful context. Countries such as Australia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand have implemented sweeping firearm reforms following high-profile incidents. These reforms often focused on semi-automatic rifles and shotguns, with varying degrees of success in reducing firearm-related violence. The United States, by contrast, has a very different legal and cultural landscape, with firearm policy shaped by constitutional considerations and state-level variation. Bill C-21 aligns more closely with the approaches taken in countries that emphasize reducing the availability of certain firearm types, rather than focusing solely on illegal possession. However, the Canadian context is distinct. Canada already has strict licensing requirements, mandatory training, and continuous eligibility screening. The majority of firearms used in crime are obtained illegally, often through smuggling or underground markets. This creates a unique policy environment in which legal ownership and criminal activity are largely separate issues. The central question raised by Bill C-21 is not whether regulation is necessary. Canada has long embraced a regulated approach to firearms, but whether the specific focus of the legislation aligns with the patterns observed in national data. The bill targets firearms that are legally owned, tightly regulated, and infrequently used in crime, while the firearms most commonly associated with violent incidents, particularly illegal handguns, fall largely outside its scope. Understanding this distinction is essential for evaluating the potential impact of the legislation. It also sets the stage for the next part of our discussion, the economic footprint of legal firearm ownership in Canada and how policy decisions intersect with the broader economic landscape. Firearm policy discussions in Canada often focus on crime, safety, and regulation. What receives far less attention is the economic dimension of legal firearm ownership, a dimension that spans training, retail, tourism, conservation, manufacturing, and rural development. Understanding this economic footprint is essential for evaluating how policy decisions interact with broader national and regional economies. Legal firearm ownership in Canada is not a niche activity. It supports a wide network of businesses, jobs, and services across the country. The most comprehensive public domain estimate places the annual economic contribution of hunting and sport shooting at approximately $8.5 billion. This figure includes spending on firearms and ammunition, outdoor equipment, travel, lodging, guiding services, conservation fees, and a wide range of related activities. To understand how this number takes shape, it helps to break the ecosystem into its major components. One of the first steps in legal firearm ownership is training. Before an individual can obtain a firearms license, they must complete certified safety courses, pass written and practical examinations, and undergo background checks. These requirements support instructors, training facilities, testing centers, and administrative staff. Because licenses must be renewed and training is often repeated or expanded, this represents ongoing economic activity rather than a one-time cost. Retail spending forms another major component. Licensed firearm owners purchase firearms, ammunition, optics, cleaning supplies, safety equipment, storage solutions, and a wide range of accessories. These purchases support local gun shops, sporting goods stores, Canadian distributors, manufacturers, and logistics companies. The supply chain is extensive, and each link contributes to employment and economic output. Shooting ranges and clubs also play a significant role. Canada has more than 900 shooting ranges, each requiring land, construction, safety inspections, insurance, and ongoing maintenance. Ranges employ staff, host competitions, offer training sessions, and provide recreational opportunities for members. Membership fees, range time, and event participation all contribute to the economic footprint. Hunting is another major driver, particularly in rural and northern communities. Hunters contribute through licensing fees, conservation levies, travel to hunting areas, lodging, guiding services, equipment purchases, and tourism spending. Many small communities rely on seasonal hunting activity to support local businesses, outfitters, and hospitality services. Conservation programs also benefit, as hunting licenses and associated fees help fund wildlife management and habitat protection. Ancillary industries extend the economic impact even further. Gunsmiths, repair technicians, insurance providers, event organizers, outdoor gear companies, and media outlets, including magazines, podcasts, and training platforms, all form part of the broader ecosystem. These industries rely on a stable base of legal firearm owners who participate in regulated activities and invest in equipment, training, and compliance. Employment figures reflect the scale of this ecosystem. Approximately 50,000 people work in the Canadian firearm industry, including retailers, distributors, range staff, manufacturing employees, tourism operators, and support services. There are more than 2,300 federally licensed firearm businesses operating across the country, ranging from small independent shops to large distributors and specialized manufacturers. Daily spending patterns illustrate the ongoing nature of this economic activity. Legal firearm owners collectively spend more than $1 million per day on firearms, ammunition, accessories, and related equipment. Recreational shooters, competitors, and hunters fire more than 1 million rounds of ammunition daily, implying significant recurring spending on ammunition alone. When all of these components are combined, the economic footprint of legal firearm ownership becomes substantial. The $8.5 billion estimate is conservative, as it does not fully capture capital investments in shooting ranges, construction costs, training and certification programs, media production, indirect tourism spending, or the logistics networks that support retail and distribution. This economic context is important because it intersects with policy decisions. Regulations that affect legal firearm ownership can have ripple effects across multiple sectors, particularly in rural areas where hunting and outdoor recreation play a central role in local economies. Understanding these connections helps provide a more complete picture of how firearm policy fits within Canada's broader economic landscape. With this economic foundation in mind, we can now turn to the next part of our discussion, the broader context of federal spending and how major national expenditures relate to revenue-generating sectors across the country. Part 7: Federal Spending and Context. Understanding the economic footprint of legal firearm ownership becomes even more meaningful when placed alongside the broader landscape of federal spending. This comparison is not about evaluating whether particular expenditures are good or bad. Instead, it provides context for how different sectors of the economy interact with national priorities and how policy decisions can influence industries that generate revenue, employment, and regional stability. Canada's federal budget encompasses a wide range of commitments, from social programs and infrastructure to international aid and economic development. These expenditures reflect national priorities and long-term strategic goals. They also illustrate the scale at which the federal government operates and the financial pressures that shape policy decisions. One major area of spending involves international commitments. Canada has provided substantial financial support to Ukraine, including military assistance, humanitarian aid, and economic stabilization measures. These contributions are part of a broader international effort and represent billions of dollars in direct and indirect support. Another significant area of investment is industrial development, particularly in emerging technologies. In recent years, Canada has committed large sums to support electric vehicle battery manufacturing, clean energy infrastructure, and related supply chains. These investments are intended to position Canada as a competitive player in global markets, but they also require substantial public funding. Housing is another major priority. Federal programs aimed at increasing housing supply, supporting affordable housing, and addressing homelessness involve billions of dollars in spending. These initiatives respond to rising housing costs, population growth, and regional disparities in availability. Climate-related spending also plays a central role in the federal budget. Canada has committed funds to climate adaptation, emissions reduction, and international climate finance. These programs support environmental goals and international agreements, but they also represent long-term financial commitments. Foreign aid, public health programs, and social benefits, including child benefits, dental care, and pandemic-related measures, add further layers to the federal spending landscape. Each of these programs serves a specific purpose, and each requires sustained funding. Financial frameworks overseen or influenced by national institutions also contribute to the broader picture. Emergency liquidity programs, mortgage purchase initiatives, climate finance structures, and public pension investment strategies involve hundreds of billions of dollars in public funds or public-backed assets. These mechanisms help stabilize markets, support economic growth, and manage long-term financial risks. When viewed together, these expenditures illustrate the scale and complexity of federal financial commitments. They also highlight the importance of revenue-generating sectors, including industries such as tourism, natural resources, international education, and legal firearm ownership, in supporting economic activity and contributing to the tax base. The economic footprint of legal firearm ownership, while modest compared to national-level expenditures, plays a meaningful role in specific regions and industries. Policies that affect this sector can influence local economies, employment, and recreational infrastructure. Understanding these connections helps provide a more complete picture of how firearm policy fits within Canada's broader fiscal environment. With this context in place, we can now move toward the final section of our discussion, a closing reflection that brings together the key themes explored throughout this episode. Part 8, Closing Reflection. As we reach the end of this episode, it's helpful to step back and look at the broader picture that emerges from the data, the trends, and the policy context we've explored. Firearm-related violent crime in Canada represents a small but significant portion of overall violence. While the national rate has fluctuated in recent years, the long-term trend shows an increase compared to a decade ago. These incidents are not evenly distributed across the country. They are concentrated in specific regions, particularly in the territories and the northern provinces, and they are shaped by local conditions, community structures, and the presence of organized crime. The data also shows a clear distinction between legal and illegal firearm possession. Licensed firearm owners, individuals who have completed training, passed background checks, and are subject to continuous screening, account for a small fraction of firearm-related violent crime. The vast majority of incidents involve individuals who do not hold a valid firearms license. This pattern holds across multiple categories of violent crime, including homicide. When we examine the types of firearms used in crime, the picture becomes even clearer. Handguns, particularly illegal handguns, are the most common firearms involved in violent incidents. Rifles and shotguns appear far less frequently, and fully automatic firearms are almost always linked to smuggling or illegal modification. A substantial portion of incidents involve unknown or imitation firearms, which complicates efforts to draw conclusions about specific weapon types. Bill C-21, the most recent major piece of firearm legislation, focuses on restricting or prohibiting access to certain categories of firearms, including handguns and a wide range of semi-automatic rifles. It also introduces an evergreen definition designed to capture future models. While the bill targets firearms that are legally owned and tightly regulated, The data shows that the firearms most commonly used in crime are obtained illegally and fall largely outside the legal framework. Beyond crime and regulation, legal firearm ownership plays a meaningful role in Canada's economy. Training, retail, tourism, conservation, manufacturing, and recreational infrastructure all contribute to an economic footprint estimated at more than $8 billion annually. This activity supports tens of thousands of jobs and provides important economic stability in rural and northern communities. When placed alongside the scale of federal spending from international commitments and industrial development to housing, climate programs, and social benefits, the economic footprint of legal firearm ownership represents one of many sectors that contribute to Canada's broader fiscal landscape. Understanding how policy decisions interact with these sectors helps provide a more complete picture of national priorities and economic dynamics. Throughout this episode, the focus has been on data, context, and clarity. Firearm policy is a complex area that intersects with public safety, economics, community well-being, and national priorities. By examining the evidence carefully and understanding the distinctions between legal and illegal possession, between different types of firearms, and between regional patterns, we gain a clearer view of the challenges and considerations that shape this area of public policy. As Canada continues to navigate these issues, the importance of evidence-based decision-making remains central. Policies that reflect the reality shown in the data and that account for the diverse contexts across the country are best positioned to support public safety, economic stability, and community resilience. This concludes today's episode. Thank you for taking the time to explore this topic in depth. Annual economic impact of program/sector changes in Canada per year. Refined. Here is a version that keeps your emotion, your honesty, and your perspective, but removes anything that could sound extreme or unbalanced. It's steady, thoughtful, and respectful. To those of you who follow this podcast, and I know it's a small group right now, I want to end today's episode with something personal. My goal in creating these podcasts has never been to take sides or twist the data. We have enough of that already in the public sphere. My intention has always been to present information as clearly and honestly as I can, and to let you think about it for yourself. But today, I want to share a few reflections of my own. I hope you won't find them out of place. I'm not pro-firearm or anti-firearm. I understand that firearms are part of some people's lives, and that many Canadians genuinely enjoy the sport, the discipline, and the learning that comes with it. Firearms are expensive. Ammunition is expensive. This is not a child's pastime. It's an adult hobby that requires training, responsibility, and commitment. I respect the people who take that responsibility seriously. I respect those who have spent hours studying for their licenses, who follow the rules, who store their firearms properly, and who participate in their sport safely. From my perspective, it's a valid hobby, one that brings people peace, focus, and connection with nature. And that's why Bill C-21 troubles me. Not because I'm emotional about firearms themselves, but because I'm emotional about governance, about how decisions are made, how evidence is used, and how often law-abiding people become the easiest targets for policy that doesn't match the data. From everything I've researched, Bill C-21 places its weight on the people who already follow the rules. It restricts those who have complied with every requirement, passed every background check, and contributed to an industry that generates billions of dollars in economic activity. Meanwhile, the data shows that the vast majority of firearm-related crime involves individuals who are unlicensed, prohibited, or connected to illegal markets. That mismatch is what concerns me. What also concerns me is the broader pattern. Profitable, well-regulated, revenue-positive sectors, whether it's the firearms industry or international education, are being weakened or dismantled by federal decisions that don't appear to consider the economic consequences. These sectors contribute tens of billions of dollars to Canada's GDP. They support jobs, communities, and local economies. And yet, they are treated as expendable. I find that deeply frustrating. Not because of ideology, but because of logic. Because of economics. Because of governance. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking you to take a position. I'm simply sharing the conclusion I've reached after months of research. Bill C-21 does not align with the data, it does not target the primary sources of firearm-related crime, and it risks undermining industries that contribute significantly to Canada's economy. That's my honest view. Thank you for listening, and thank you for giving me the space to share it. I appreciate every one of you who takes the time to think through these issues with me. Here is a version that keeps your emotion, your honesty, and your perspective, but removes anything that could sound extreme or unbalanced. It's steady, thoughtful, and respectful. To those of you who follow this podcast, and I know it's a small group right now, I want to end today's episode with something personal. My goal in creating these podcasts has never been to take sides or twist the data. We have enough of that already in the public sphere. My intention has always been to present information as clearly and honestly as I can, and to let you think about it for yourself. But today, I want to share a few reflections of my own. I hope you won't find them out of place. I'm not pro-firearm or anti-firearm. I understand that firearms are part of some people's lives, and that many Canadians genuinely enjoy the sport, the discipline, and the learning that comes with it. Firearms are expensive. Ammunition is expensive. This is not a child's pastime. It's an adult hobby that requires training, responsibility, and commitment. I respect the people who take that responsibility seriously. I respect those who have spent hours studying for their licenses, who follow the rules, who store their firearms properly, and who participate in their sport safely. From my perspective, it's a valid hobby, one that brings people peace, focus, and connection with nature. And that's why Bill C-21 troubles me. Not because I'm emotional about firearms themselves, but because I'm emotional about governance, about how decisions are made, how evidence is used, and how often law-abiding people become the easiest targets for policy that doesn't match the data. From everything I've researched, Bill C-21 places its weight on the people who already follow the rules. It restricts those who have complied with every requirement, passed every background check, and contributed to an industry that generates billions of dollars in economic activity. Meanwhile, the data shows that the vast majority of firearm-related crime involves individuals who are unlicensed, prohibited, or connected to illegal markets. That mismatch is what concerns me. What also concerns me is the broader pattern. Profitable, well-regulated, revenue-positive sectors, whether it's the firearms industry or international education, are being weakened or dismantled by federal decisions that don't appear to consider the economic consequences. These sectors contribute tens of billions of dollars to Canada's GDP. They support jobs, communities, and local economies. And yet, they are treated as expendable. I find that deeply frustrating. Not because of ideology, but because of logic. Because of economics. Because of governance. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking you to take a position. I'm simply sharing the conclusion I've reached after months of research. Bill C-21 does not align with the data, it does not target the primary sources of firearm-related crime, and it risks undermining industries that contribute significantly to Canada's economy. That's my honest view. Thank you for listening, and thank you for giving me the space to share it. I appreciate every one of you who takes the time to think through these issues with me.
Good day, everyone. I want to bring a few charts into the discussion before I close this off. If you were to look at this chart, excuse me, you'll see that the majority of firearms ownership, legal firearms ownership, occurs in Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, and British Columbia. And they account for about 80% plus of the firearms, licensed firearms in Canada. So it brings out an interesting perspective. The second chart I want to bring attention to is that firearms-related crime in Canada is overwhelmingly 97 to 99% committed by those who don't have licenses for their firearms. And I've been able to download a number of charts from the public domain, and they all say the same thing. And they support and corroborate the fact that Bill C-21 is, okay, I'm probably going to get into trouble for saying it's nonsense, but it's unnecessary. Legal firearm ownership is not the problem. It's illegal firearm ownership. And for the government to potentially be destroying in some capacity the legal firearms industry, which accounts for allegedly almost $60 billion of revenue into the gross domestic product of Canada, just seems to be insanity. I don't understand it. This government, going off topic a little bit, they're trying to cap and reduce the number of international students studying in Canada. And that activity is another approximately a $60 billion industry, which brings huge amounts of money into the Canadian system. And this government started with Trudeau, but now into Carney's government, seems to want to eliminate all this source of legal, valuable revenue. I don't understand it. So if we look at these charts, you can see that handguns are the primary issue, and yet to a point, Bill C-21 is focused on anything semi-automatic. Well, that includes handguns. And once again, these charts over and over repeatedly go to support the simple fact that legal firearm ownership in Canada is not the issue. And yet this government is potentially going to destroy this sector of our economy. I won't comment on every chart. There's so many of them. But the same net result, same conclusion is apparent, that legal firearm ownership is not the problem. And if it's not the problem, then this government needs to be looking at broader policies regarding crime and importation or legal importation of firearms across the border, that sort of thing. Leave legal licensing and those who own legally licensed firearms, leave them alone. They're working within the boundaries of the law. Sure, there's what the stats show over and over is that 0.5 to 2% on the high side of licensed firearm owners cause problems. But I mean, look at the perspective. 99% of the problems are caused by illegal firearm users. So why is the government targeting legal licensed ownership? What's really going on here? It seems apparent to me from the stats, and they're consistent, that this government has an alternate agenda, and I don't know what it is. But when they want to destroy Canada's international students program studying here, which is reportedly in the $60 billion range, and they want to do the same thing with legal firearm ownership, another $60 billion. They're spending money like it grows on trees, especially this government. I mean, allegedly the stats show that this government will put Canada into a $2.5 trillion deficit. That's what the stats show. And makes no sense. Just makes no sense at all. Why they want to harass people who abide by the law. They get licensed and trained. And I don't want to comment on these charts specifically, but there's no doubt at all. Out of 14,000 plus incidents, legal ownership accounts to 0.5 to 1.5%. You're never going to eliminate or have perfection. But why are they targeting this industry and people who are abiding by the law? I don't understand. And it just makes no sense. And I've seen some of the documentation that the government's sending out to legal licensed purchases of weapons, that they can be potential, if they don't turn them in, they can be charged, put in jail, fined. I mean, is that really what our government's coming to? So they're going to take all of these people who abided by the law, they got trained, they got their licenses, they purchased legally, and now we're going to throw them in jail? I don't know. The logic evades me. Don't understand it. I don't understand it. And then we bring this evergreen definition into it, which to me is like a carte blanche blanket provision. So in the future, if this bill is brought into law, what it's going to do is Bill C-21 will essentially cover anything, and there might not be any public dissemination of the data. People may not know that there's been changes in the law. I mean, this is not right. This is a distorted form of democracy. When people abide by the law and they bring out potential new legislation, I don't understand it. I think there's another issue, and I don't support or I don't dismiss licensed firearm ownership. But I have another question on this buyback. I'm hearing, I don't know the legitimacy of it, but I'm hearing that the buyback program has limited funds. So let me come up with some arbitrary number. And I don't know whether these are true. I'm sure that firearms owners know that if person X legally purchase a firearm, let's say it costs $500, and then with all the essentials, let's put it to $1,000. Well, is the government going to give these folks back $1,000, or are they going to come along and say, "Oh, well, we haven't got any funds left, that we're going to give you nothing, or we're going to give you, $20 or $30"? I don't know how this makes any sense, and I don't. It just makes no sense at all. And then it brings into the conversation grandfathered firearms that are on the prohibited list. If they've been grandfathered by a collector, or been grandfathered and a collector has them, do they have to turn them in? Because from what I'm reading, they don't. So while I don't agree with Bill C-21, I don't. I think it's just wasted legislation, wasted taxpayer money, and it looks like the courts are going to be involved, which wastes more time and money. So is this bill, if it's passed, which it probably will be, is it not cover everyone? Because apparently it doesn't. And this evergreen law is like a huge blanket. And in very lay terms, I'm not a lawyer, but in very lay terms, this green law seems to be a provision that says, oh, well, if we come along, this is the government speaking, if we come along and determine some firearm or firearms is later determined we don't want them out there, that if you don't turn them in, we can arrest you and fine you and destroy your life. I don't understand this. It doesn't make any sense to me. None. So what the charts show, I had 23 charts, and what every single one of them shows, without any second thought, is that legal ownership is not a problem in Canada. The problem is with illegal ownership and use. And I want to close on a couple of very small issues, and that pertains to enforcement. Since the majority of legal firearm ownership is in southern areas, so the enforcement will not be equal. Are we going to send up enforcement officers up to Northern Ontario where there's one person for every 100 square kilometers? I mean, this Bill C-21 seems to focus on population areas, on the legal ownership. Makes no sense to me. And because of the firearms registration system, the government knows everyone who has legally purchased any of these firearms. So if this bill passes and people are given till the end of the year to turn in the required firearms that they have purchased, so if the government sees they haven't turned them in, are we going to have law enforcement pounding on people's doors, breaking people's doors down, and searching their houses for these firearms? I mean, just makes no sense. It just doesn't. So I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything. I think the best policy is speak about it, and hopefully some of these major groups will take this Bill C-21 to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada will find a resolution which makes sense, because this bill doesn't. That's it. Thanks. I didn't make a good podcast today. I'll try to do better, but I know I didn't do a good job today. In any case, thank you so much.